Now we're going to describe anatomical planes as it refers to most animals. Because we're unique as Homo sapiens, we are bipedal. But most animals are quadrupeds, meaning that they stand on 4 feet. And in terms of that, that changes many of the planes that we discuss. If you're interested in going into veterinary medicine, this is something that is going to be very important to you on an everyday basis. When we talk about the anatomical position of an animal, we still have some things that are the same as in humans. Humans are erect in anatomical position with their head up, and animals are erect in an anatomical position with their head up. And in the same way, humans have their eyes forward and animals have their eyes forward as well. Then things start to get dicey because humans will have in anatomical position their arms out with their palms up. Now, I am not showing you anatomical position for this human because this graphic is much easier to describe and I haven't seen anything better. So I really did look. This is not what I'm showing you for anatomical position for a human because you would have palms up. Now, for anatomical position of an animal, there's no palms, so I can't give you palms up. But all feet are on the floor, just as all feet are on the floor in anatomical position for humans. So some things are the same. Let's start with other things that are the same. In a human, we discussed sagittal and midline plane. This is sagittal plane that divides the human into right and left sides. In the same way, when you're talking about quadrupeds, you are dividing between right and left side with a transverse plane that goes right through the skull and then down through the body. It's in blue here and it's in blue here. Think about the sagittal plane, the center of wisdom or sage behavior. Sagittal plane, they're all from the same root. Start at the head in the human and in the animal and go and slice down through the body, dividing the eyes, dividing the nostrils. Very important for this wisdom plane, this sage plane. Again, when we are comparing bipedal humans to quadruped animals, we have another plane that we can look at that has some relationship to what you know in your own experience as a human. Let's look at the transverse plane next, the pink plane that in humans is at the umbilical, the umbilicus, and that is a plane that divides the human into a superior aspect of the transverse plane and an inferior aspect of the transverse plane. And sometimes you will hear, instead of superior, you will hear cranial, as in cranium, around the brain, the skull. And instead of inferior, you may hear in humans, but not often, you may hear caudal, relating to the tailbone aspect of the human body below the transverse plane. Not often heard for humans, but when you get to the transverse plane in quadrupeds, that's where this becomes important. The transverse plane in quadrupeds will divide the cranial area of the skull from the tail area. Well, in that case, the transverse plane is going to be this pink plane that has a cranial aspect toward the head, toward the cranium or the skull, and a caudal aspect toward the tail. So the transverse plane in an animal that is a quadruped is different, but in the end, it looks at the same aspects of the body. It looks at the aspect of the body that is the cranium versus the tail, the cranial versus the caudal. So while the transverse plane in a bipedal human is a horizontal plane, the transverse plane in a quadruped is a vertical plane, but it's the same cranial and caudal. Okay? Comes to the third plane for anatomical reference. Let's start with what you know. This third plane for anatomical reference in the human is going to be the frontal plane that we talk about. And that is one of the vertical planes in humans that divides the body from a frontal section and a back section in a human. So here in orange, like yellow, I have my highlighting in orange, is the frontal plane in humans. And here is we don't call it the front, we call it the anterior side of the frontal plane. We may also call it the ventral side because the lungs ventilate and they are toward the anterior aspect of this frontal plane. Your lungs are not in the back of you. Your lungs are right up front. And in terms of that, we can talk about the back of this frontal plane, but we don't use the word back. We use posterior, or we use the word dorsal. And remember, dorsal, you can remember for the Latin word dormire, to sleep. In anatomical position, you would be dormant on your back. So that is the anterior side, or the ventral side of the frontal plane. This is the posterior or the dorsal side of the frontal plane. When it comes to quadrupeds, we are still talking about the back, and we are still talking about the ventral area as being where the lungs are. And in doing so, for a quadruped that has all 4 feet on the ground, that turns a bit, but it's still the same relationship of the words. So let's take our frontal plane that is vertical in a human and divides ventral sections from dorsal back sections, and let's look at a quadruped, and their back is here, their dorsal side is here, and their lungs or ventral side is down here. Our frontal plane in orange divides the back of this animal from the ventral side where the lungs are located underneath. So we still have the same relationship to the body parts, but the plane switches its orientation based on that. So when you have a frontal plane in a quadruped, it is dividing out the dorsal side, like you would stroke the back of a goat or a dog, that side, versus the belly side, which we really call the ventral side, because a goat's lungs or a dog's lungs are down here, just as they are with us. So this frontal plane and transverse plane can get confusing, but if you remember what you are referring to in terms of body parts, you will figure it out. Draw it out. I draw everything out, as you know, on the whiteboard when I need to think about things. For your exams, I heartily recommend that you draw a human figure and draw this out just in stick figures. You don't have to be dramatic. And then draw a quadruped and draw out the planes in different colors. Different colors really help a lot. You will need to identify things like this on an exam because this terminology is critical to your work in biology. There's no getting around it. You will not be talking about front and back. And you will be talking about right and left, but you'll also be talking about medial and distal and proximal and distal, medial and lateral. So get very used to it. Let's go over orientation terms that you can go back and look at these graphics and make sure that you understand. I'm not going to go over them all again, But I will tell you this, we did not talk about superficial planes and deep planes. And I don't really have to go into the graphics of that, okay? Your skin is superficial to your bone, and your bone is deeper than your skin. So we talk about being more internal as deeper and being more toward the surface as superficial. Kind of like with people, you know, some people are superficial, some people are really deep. I hope you think of me as really deep. I hope that this helps you out, and I hope that you'll check out the PDF and you will use this for the rest of your biology life. Take care.